Hey gang, Luke here. What you're about to hear is a live show recorded at the NABERS and CBD Conference 2024. That's National Australian Built Environment Rating System and Commercial Building Disclosure Program Conference. It was a heap of fun. Myself, Frankie, and our friend Carlos Flores unpacking the conference outcomes, including some big announcements from the national government. So hang on for that. But I'm also very conscious it has been a big couple of weeks in federal energy and climate policy, not least some of the fairly interesting decisions that have come out of the federal coalition in terms of emissions reduction targets and nuclear policy. So what we've done is we've recorded some bonus content, and I have a message here from Global Vice President for Marketing and Extortion, Frankie Muscovich. If you want to get your hands on our analysis in that space, you need to head over to patreon.com/letmesumup to partake in that sweet, sweet boko. But for everybody else, hang on and you can enjoy this live show recorded just a couple of weeks ago. And one final note, the audio desk was having a few issues with the audio quality early in this session. So the audio quality is not great right up front, but hang in there, it gets a lot better as we go on.
This is Let Me Sum Up, your irregular deep dive into conferences about climate and energy. I'm Luke Menzel, recording today on Gadigal land from the 2024 NABERS and Commercial Building Disclosure Conference at the University of Technology, Sydney, and I'm joined today by my two co-hosts. You know her, you love her. She is a big deal at the Property Council. She is, of course, the co-chair of the NABERS National Steering Committee. But her most important role, what are you doing up here, Carlos? Get back down there. You know the pre-briefing? We spent 10 minutes.
I'm loud and everything. Shame on you.
But her most important role is, of course, as Global Vice President for Marketing and Extortion at the Let Me Sum Up podcast. Round of applause for Frankie Muscovich.
Thanks, Luke. Oh, isn't it delightful to be here on Gadigal country today in Sydney?
It is.
I mean, look, some might call it a hostile takeover. Others might, look at it as an opportunity to expand your AQ and pivot seamlessly from a conversation about, future crunch and what's coming down the pipeline to your regular deep dive into recent reports on climate and energy, because that's what we're about at the Let Me Sum Up podcast. But that's not exactly the format for today's podcast, is it, Luke?
It is not. We're here to sum up a big day at the NABERS and CBD conference. We are, however, Frankie, a little bit devo because our regular co-host is not here. Tennant found a conference that he regarded as more important than...
Yeah, we're deeply offended, but also, I now have free reign over the situation. So marketing and extortion knows no bounds. If you weren't a subscriber to the podcast before you entered the room, good news is you're not allowed to leave until you subscribe.
So I was very concerned about the power imbalance here with Frankie by herself. So we have arranged a Tennant Reid stunt double to just balance things up a little bit. A man who by day is Director of the National Australian Built Environment Rating System and by night a noted designer of climate-themed board games. Yes, he hates climate change so much, he fights it for fun in his spare time. Carlos Flores, ladies and gentlemen.
Woohoo!
So anyone that listens to the podcast, and I know you do, Carlos, knows that Tennant's favourite thing is carbon border adjustment mechanisms.
CBAM.
CBAMs. He can't get enough of them.
I love CBAM. I mean, what is CBAM? It's an embodied carbon measure for steel and cement. That is what CBAM is. And at this conference, we've been talking about embodied carbon non-stop from 9 in the morning. So I think there's we're all for decarbonising our industry and decarbonising our building sector.
Your media game is so good, you answer the question you want to be asked.
Absolutely. Is this an attempt to audition for Tennant's spot ongoing? I think that was pretty good.
I got it for today already. So.
You did.
There you go. Watch your back read. On this week's show, we are summing up a big day at the NABERS and CBD Conference 2024. But first, we are conscious that this is going to be going into the podcast feed, and there's going to be people listening to this podcast that don't know what a NABERS is. So we need to explain it for the people following along at home. But we also realise that everyone in this room, 300 odd people and however many people are watching live, online, they know NABERS back to front. So we need to explain it, but we need to explain it quickly. What I decided was the best way we could do that would be to get you two to play a little game. We're going to get each of you to face off, to provide us the 60-second elevator pitch for NABERS, the encapsulation, the distillation of this beautiful policy architecture that we've collectively created. And then at the end of that, I'm going to get the people here in this room to make noise to tell us who won in a little game that I like to call Neighbourly Shove.
As the Global Vice President for Marketing and Extortion, I didn't sign up to this.
Well, you probably were also not paying attention in the pre-briefing.
Okay, maybe I did. Damn it.
So, can we get a timer up on screen?
God.
The crack tea back at the AV desk. There we go.
It's going to end badly. This is going to end badly. Oh my God, it's already started. Whoa.
No. It's there.
Okay.
Someone gets 1 second less, apparently. I'm going to go, I think you should go first, Frankie, because Carlos is our guest. We should let him.
I think you're my guest.
I mean, well, look, that's all very debatable
seriously.
at this point. Like, whose logo is... Well,
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
If you ignore that.
You are not in control anymore, Carlos.
Oh, dear.
All right, so I'm going to go 3, 2, 1, and then we'll start the timer, and you'll be off.
Oh, my God. All right.
Are you ready?
Yeah, this is going to end terribly, but we'll give it a go. All right.
3, 2, 1, start the timer.
The National Australian Built Environment Rating System measures the environmental performance across energy, water, waste and indoor environment of different building types. It does this by doing a simple, robust apples-to-apples comparison of different buildings by using data, real-world performance data, based on things like energy bills. Everybody needs good NABERS ratings. The rating scale goes from 1 to 6. 1 is terrible, 6 is pretty good.
There you go. Three.
Of energy management,
2,
energy
1,
efficiency
okay.
and electrification measures.
Bow, bow.
Perfect blend.
What? What's happened now?
To save
Oh, no,
money
you remind us.
and reduce emissions to the tune of, under 12.
Okay, you can stop
All right.
talking.
No,
All right.
fine.
Round of
whatever.
applause for
I
taking that.
win. Come on, vote for me.
Do you have music as well?
I don't. The AV game is
Look,
not-
it was a
it's not
risky
that
strategy, but I'm feeling like it paid off. So.
Yeah, all right. The time has been reset. 3, 2, 1, off you go, Carlos.
A lot of ratings
Yeah,
around
right.
the world, including in Europe, in most of Europe, the way they work is like this. Somebody goes into a building. Do you have efficient lighting? Yes. Do you have efficient insulation? Yes. Do you have an efficient boiler? Yes. Oh, well, your building must be super efficient. A+. That is the way sustainability works in lots of countries. And then you look at their bills, and they use an enormous amount of energy and terrible emissions. Because sustainability is not about your kit. It's not about having fancy toys in buildings. It's about how you use them. It's about reducing pressure on the environment. So what we do is we look at your energy bills, your emissions. Are you using less than other buildings just like yours? Are you using less water? Are you using less waste? And if you are, prove it, demonstrate it, disclose it, and prove that you're actually doing better for the environment.
All right. Round of applause for Carlos.
That was pretty okay. That was pretty good.
I feel like Frankie gave a really grounded technical explanation of NABERS, and you went for the hearts and minds, Carlos, which is very on type for you. So we need to decide who wins. So I'm going to say Frankie's name, and I'm going to say Carlos's name, and we're going to do an applause-o-meter. So whoever gets the most applause wins this incredibly consequential competition. First of all, who thought Frankie gave the best explanation? You'd reckon?
Yeah.
Noting this is effectively a popularity contest between you two.
I don't think my ego can take it, but okay.
Who thinks Carlos gave the best explanation? I think you got more screams, Frankie.
Oh, well, in that case, I claim the victory.
The screams have it. All right, enough shenanigans. Frankie,
Yes.
what was your biggest takeout from today's incredible conference, the NABERS and CD conference here at the UTS Aerial Function Centre?
I think it's about pace and ambition, actually. There wasn't a single session here today that wasn't talking about the need to accelerate and do more with real initiatives on the table to take us there, whether it was this morning's announcement from Assistant Minister McAllister on the review of the CBD program and the expansion there, to the launch of NABERS embodied carbon pilot, to the launch of the energy performance indicator. There is a lot going on. We all need to lean in, and I think I reflected this morning, but the last 10 years is not going to be like the next 10 years. I think we are playing catch up, and the need to be ambitious and to really, I actually think the comments from Melissa earlier about being adaptable and being able to be okay with a new pace of change is going to be really important for all of us. It's our time, guys. Buildings were not on the centre stage the last 10 years. But if we think about the way that governments around the country are going to need to find these emissions reduction achievements over the 2030 or 2035 targets, and they do the modelling exercise, it should tell us that demand-side action, energy efficiency, electrification of buildings are some of the no-brainer, lowest-cost emissions abatement opportunities out there. So that is very exciting.
There's so much in that to unpack. We're going to pick one of those things and dive into them. But first I want to hear from you, Carlos. What was your big takeout from today?
I think we started the day with two really big announcements when it comes to policy. We heard that on the existing buildings front, the Commonwealth government is looking at potentially expanding the mandatory disclosure scheme, the commercial building disclosure program, to basically cover a lot more building types beyond the office sector. The majority of the built environment today doesn't have disclosure, unlike most European countries, for example. And this is about setting a blueprint for potentially expanding to many of some of the larger building sectors in education and in healthcare and in retail, a lot of the other sectors beyond commercial offices. And at the same time, we had a session talking about new buildings in the National Construction Code and increasing the energy efficiency and decarbonization requirements there. So if you think about it, the two biggest levers to decarbonize the building sector, not the only ones, but the biggest, are disclosure for existing buildings and the National Construction Code for new buildings. Both of them are at the table now, proposing potentially very significant, very ambitious decarbonization pathways. And a lot of people in this room have been invited right now to comment on that, to provide their feedback. What do you think we should do? And I think it's just a great opportunity. Some of the things many people have been calling for a long time are potentially happening now, and there's an opportunity to say, have your say. I think it would be great if many people in this room would express that. What are your thoughts? How do you think we should go about those things?
I think we need to start with the significant announcement that you both mentioned, which is the consultation paper that Assistant Minister McAllister launched today to expand commercial building disclosure to a whole bunch of different asset types, which are currently rated by NABERS, but it's not mandatory to disclose the ratings. Do you just want to reflect on that Frankie? Why is that significant?
I was reflecting to some of the team from KPMG who are involved in the analysis that underpins what's been put forward in the consultation paper. I think one of the concepts in speaking to them last year when they were developing the work that has stayed there, and I think is hopefully central to the way this gets carried forward, is that this should be the foundation for decarbonisation of the commercial building stock in the country. It should provide for NABERS to cover everything that can possibly be covered by NABERS. And then it should also include a long-term program of review and ratchet to bring in different building types to disclosure. Once those ratings, are mature and well accepted and everything, then it sort of foresees a role for bringing in minimum energy performance standards, MEPs for buildings, which is a huge shift in thinking for the Australian sector. And other economic sectors are having their reckoning, right? The industry sector's got the safeguard mechanism, the transport sector's looking at vehicle efficiency standards, and so it's only a matter of time before we in the building space need to have those foundations in place. And so I love the elegance of the thinking around that, because I think it sets us up to continue with ambition over time. And I think my very great hope is that we're not, relegated back to a government of the day deciding whether or not they're going to review a program on an ad hoc basis. That this is the program ongoing. Everything is covered by NABERS. Everything eventually will be part of disclosure, and it's just a question of when and how that's done in a way that brings the industry along. There's sort of so much potential for incentive programs to plug in along the way to help with the pain points. It could be a thing of beauty, and I want to see it. I want to see a really ambitious version of that be embraced by the industry.
Well, on the Let Me Sum Up podcast, Frankie, we're regularly summing up government consultation papers. We read them and then we talk about them so people don't have to read them. This consultation paper isn't particularly long, so I think everybody...
It's 5 pages.
Right.
You can look at a table and basically get it.
It's effectively NABERS, it's great. CBD, it's great. Let's make those things great in more sectors. And then there's this pretty picture, which is these are all the tranches of buildings that we're going to be bringing on that journey over the next 10 years. So some of the ones that are sort of first cabs off the rank: hotels, data centres, shopping centres. What else is in there?
Well, the very first one is offices, and I think a rising of ambition of what you do in offices, right? The 2019 review of the program recommended the expansion to office tenancies, which I've been banging on about forever. Please, can we do office tenancies and change the trigger to a regular requirement to rate? So I think one of the other really good insights from the 2019 review, which I know we reflect to each other, but is worth talking about more broadly because it goes to the rationale for this new kind of framework. I sort of tend to think across the building stock, the sale or lease trigger for disclosure, it may be less important in some building types. And actually what's more important is requiring people to do NABERS ratings every so often, because it's understanding your performance that gets you to the managing of what you measure. Doing as much as you can possibly do in offices is sort of very first cab off the rank, because we had those ideas 5 years ago and didn't do anything with them.
Carlos, you've had a lot of experience taking NABERS into new sectors. Program of work over the last decade has largely been creating new NABERS ratings, and it's something that you've been very successful at. It's another thing to say, well, not only have we got this rating, we want to engage with you, you're going to have to do it. That mandatory piece adds some potential stress to those conversations. People aren't necessarily going to be dancing in the streets because they have to do a NABERS rating. The people that you've been engaging with as you've been developing those ratings have necessarily been the more sophisticated, the more interested, they've put up their hands and been willing to engage with the NABERS program. So what do you see as some of the key things that we're going to have to think about? Because everyone in this room and many of the people listening at home, we're true believers, right? But we're taking this tool that we have a lot of faith in and a lot of belief in to a bunch of people who have never ever heard of NABERS. So what are the things that you're thinking about as we contemplate that next step in the conversation?
Yes, I think is might happen if NABERS gets expanded on a mandatory capacity is a much larger scale of what happens kind of every day in NABERS. So, we're launching NABERS for schools soon and for retail as well. And a lot of people who have been working with us to create those tools, they're very motivated in sustainability. They think that some of their buildings are probably performing really well, but the reality is that they just don't know. Most of them don't know. That is the challenge when something like NABERS doesn't exist in a sector, is that you're in isolation, you have a bunch of data, but you actually don't know how that data compares against other buildings in the same sectors. Am I doing great, or is it just that my portfolio is actually very low performing, so this building looks great, but it's actually just average when I look at it against all my competitors? I think we see that constantly. When we create a new rating tool, 50% of them are below average when we create benchmarks, even though there's a lot of people who are very enthusiastic. So what happens when we go broader with mandatory disclosure is that often people who've been participating in NABERS, they tend to perform better because they've been motivated in sustainability for longer. Many people that come in, everyone expects to be average. I think you may know this about psychology. Most people think that they're average or better than average at everything we do. You bring your building into NABERS, and then suddenly your school is 0 stars. And you go, how could it be 0 stars? I have solar panels. It must be much better. The reason why you are 0 stars is because your air conditioning system has been running every weekend for years. And maybe your control system didn't show that. You didn't know that until you got your 0-star NABERS rating, which is sometimes very difficult to see at the beginning. But what's fascinating is, especially from the experience in the office market, lots of people got 0, 1s, and 2 stars in 2011. What happened shortly after is there was a question about why. Why are we using twice as much than an average building, not even a great building, just an average building? How is that possible? And the reason is everything's out of whack. Things are running in the middle of the night when there's no one there. We're heating and cooling the same space all the time for years, and we haven't realized. Our controls went out of whack 5 years ago, and the system said that everything was running great, but it was overcooling at 15 degrees. Like, those things happen around the world, they happen in Australia, and often just knowing that you're using a lot more energy than what's normal gets a lot of people to ask questions that we may not ask on a daily basis.
That is true, but that's once they've got the rating. So we're telling them they have to get a rating, but they don't know the thing that you just said yet, that there will be value there. So how do you have those conversations with sectors that are like, bugger off, I know what I'm doing, there's other things that I'm more worried about?
I mean, I feel like the last time the program was reviewed, we had property council members talking to sectors that hadn't traditionally engaged with NABERS to tell a bit of the story, right?
Yep.
Because it is, like, CBD is regulation, like it's soft touch regulation. Maybe for someone who's not familiar with this sector, you think, oh, property council members, like, why would you be supporting that? Ultimately, because it saves our members millions and millions and millions, and turns out $1.7 billion in energy bills. Like, that's a reason to pay attention to it.
Yep.
The other thing that's been very true for the office market is it has become that moniker of quality. Buildings with higher ratings are worth more, can charge more rent, keep tenants longer, i.e. make more money. The analogy won't be perfectly transferable to different building types, but the potential to save vastly more money than you would outlay in doing a rating, of a given year would be worth it alone, I think, from a commercial imperative. And there will be other sort of motivators over time. But the other thing I would stress for people who aren't familiar with the program as well, most of the early gains, the taking a building from a shitty 0-star or whatever to something approaching average, might not cost you anything at all. Maybe a bit of metering in place and a change of your building controls. So it's sort of the low-hanging fruit that needs to be dealt with. And we know from the experience of expanding NABERS to new sectors, there is a lot of low-hanging fruit when you're engaging with a sector for the first time. So that is really exciting, and it should be very exciting to governments who need low-cost abatement in vast quantities, if I'm right, David.
Completely agree, Frankie. I think what I would add to that, going into new sectors and trying to bring people into sustainability through regulation or other means still requires a lot of storytelling. And I think what I like about the consultation paper that is being put out, is that it isn't, we're going to mandate NABERS on 10 sectors by June next year. It's a progressive rollout that allows us to, this community of thousands of people working in building sustainability, to reach out to a lot of people in those sectors. A lot of them are clients of people in this room, but we actually need time to tell those stories, onboard them, let them see that many buildings in almost any sector have 20 or 30% of energy consumption that they can reduce at very low cost, some of them at no cost. That is a story that we need to tell with examples. And I'm under no illusions that when you're doing any regulation, there's always going to be a portion of the market that is not going to be on board until things are running and they're seeing the benefits. And that was true in offices as well 14 years ago. If you go back and look at newspaper articles, you'll see lots of very prominent people who were against disclosure. And within 2, 3, 4 years of that, most of those voices actually went away. I do think the power of this community on bringing and reaching out to those sectors is really powerful. But having an instrument and a roadmap for disclosure actually give all of us, and basically signposting what sector do we need to go and tell those stories and on board. And the good thing about them is that all those sectors are full of sustainability champions. It might not be 100% of the hotel sector, but 10 years ago, the nucleus of champions in the hotel sector was quite small. In the last couple of years, it's grown substantially, and there's lots of companies that are very progressive, setting real ambition targets, and we can work with them and try to grow that.
That is absolutely the case, and I think that we've gotten to a really important point, which is there's a lot of good news to share about NABERS, but we need the evangelists
in this community to support that, because I don't think the NABERS team or our friends in the federal government are going to be able to do it by themselves. It's going to be everybody that understands the value making that case collectively.
It's almost like we need some more people with global marketing and extortion titles.
Yes. Are you going to do some weekend workshops, Frankie, in the marketing and extortion?
Happy to. I'm interested in world domination.
She's not joking.
Love that for NABERS.
So, where do you want to go next? So much happened today. I think we've done a reasonable job of summing up the whole the expansion of the CBD, but there was plenty of other stuff going on at the NABERS conference today.
There was. I mean, you touched on the National Construction Code. I had the privilege of moderating a chat with Mike Dodd and Erica Kenner from the ABCB. I hope you guys are still here. Would understand if you're not. They've been travelling around talking to a lot of people. It's like super exciting, right? 2019 was the last change to commercial building energy efficiency requirements. There are big changes on the table here. We're looking at another pretty significant increase in stringency across building fabric, really tightening up what you can do in terms of trading off performance against different facades and things like that. Increases to service requirements, mandatory solar on roof space that's available for it. To me, presents a fascinating kind of conversation, and maybe one of the first, I think, real points of intersection between members of mine have been wanting to do for a long time in many instances. I don't know, cover industrial rooftops in solar, only to be told by DNSPs, no, you can't do that. The area can't take it or something. It's super interesting to me what is now going to happen when there could well be a regulatory imperative to do it. And then there's this, reckoning with the energy system to make that happen, but also to optimise how that happens as well. Because, as we all know, it's not that straightforward. If you cover a bunch of mostly empty sheds in solar, there needs to be someone to off-take that energy. So there needs to be a lot of reform in energy markets that now sit alongside building codes. And wasn't that the nirvana that we were dreaming of a few years ago? Kind of more connected policy making between those two sectors. So, and I just think that's fascinating. It's also looking to future-proof basically buildings to be all electric as well.
Yeah.
Which is exciting, and another big thematic today.
Building ministers and energy ministers meeting next week. Nobody seems to know what they're talking about, but they're meeting. That's a really good start.
Yes.
What about you, Carlos?
So foreshadow a little bit about, there's been lots of conversations about embodied carbon throughout the day in a breakout session. In particular, there's two national initiatives that are driving a lot of this change recently. One of them is the fact that NABERS and the GBCA have been partnering to create a national standard for embodied carbon in buildings, as many people have heard multiple times today. That standard has been running for 3 years, that project, and technical development of that tool is mostly complete. Today, at this conference, we're opening the pilot phase, and we're going to have real buildings going through that framework in the next couple of months. Lots of people in this room were offering lots of buildings to go through those pilots, so lots of enthusiasm on that front. But at the same time, there's been a lot of work on the industry front through the Australian Sustainable Built Environment Council, or ASPEC, about major barriers in industry at all levels that are obstructing progress on embodied carbon. What are major challenges that are happening? What are some potential solutions for a lot of those challenges? And ASPEC recently released a paper on that with 7 really major issues and lots of different proposals from industry on how to tackle them. So I think there's been lots of progress both on standard, lots of proposals on skills building and complementary policies to the standard that need to be put in place to see, embodied carbon really fly and make a big difference. But just seeing the momentum and industry and government kind of together pushing in the same direction makes me really hopeful about the future.
That one kind of exemplifies to me the best of Australian built environment industry and government working together. The way that NABERS and GBCA and all the practitioners in this room have done for a really long time. We've got onto the issue early enough that I think we're setting ourselves up for success here. We don't need to have hopefully 8 different versions of different benchmarking around the country on embodied carbon. We've got the core thing now that can underpin requirements in the National Construction Code. We can put the NABERS standard in there now that that's out there. It's going to simplify a whole lot of really hard work and heavy lifting that needs to be done in the next little while. Because, to the New South Wales government's credit, they saw the opportunity to fund early work on that a few years ago. And I remember thinking, is that a little too soon? Is that a little cart before horse? Like, there's not like a huge kind of policy mandate for it. But the timing was actually just right. Because imagine if we hadn't have started that back then, everyone would be going, what the hell are we going to do about embodied carbon? And potentially 8 different governments around the country going, I have this really great idea for a rating tool or a standard. Thank God we've avoided that.
We're running out of time, but we do have...
Inconceivable.
We do have time for one more thing that has captured each of our attention over the course of a very big conference. Frankie, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. I think it was the title of the opening session, which we then changed, but I've heard repeated throughout the day, like the future is all electric. And I love being in a room of hundreds of people that are actively working towards that future and starting to see green shoots, not just in the sort of policy landscape that are going to facilitate that, even if the direction is not as clear as, some would like it to be. That is really exciting because I also now have stopped hearing about, green hydrogen being a thing in buildings. Like, thank God we can just, do away with that nonsense.
You don't hear that anymore?
Not from people who know what they're talking about.
There you go.
Or aren't the gas industry funding studies?
Or funding MasterChef.
Indeed. I had some thoughts about that recently. That gives me, a lot of hope. It's a big chunk of Scope 1 emissions. But if I always do, we do sneaky twofers for one, so I'm going again. One thing I don't hear a lot about, but I want to start hearing more about in forums like this is what we're doing about refrigerants as well, because in some building types, it's really significant and more significant than fossil gas use. It is definitely the poor cousin of electrification and phasing out fossil gas. And, there are technical challenges there and big equipment replacement costs also that need to be thought about. So I'd love a little bit more love for refrigerants into the future. Okay, thanks, bye.
I'd love to jump into that, Frankie, because there was a great sustainable finance session as well today. And one of the many things talked in that session was about how the finance sector is focusing a lot more on building electrification and buildings. We don't want them just to be efficient. We also want them to be all electric at the same time. And I think that has been, a focus in the Australian Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, a focus for a lot of banks, and that is something that is only gaining more and more momentum. And obviously, finance moves the world around. And so that was really exciting to see. Also, the same thing about embodied carbon and sustainable finance. So we're seeing a lot of these trends and waves that are driving change in climate change, converging towards, more efficiency, get rid of fossil fuels, tackle embodied carbon, and setting really good benchmarks for that. I do think we're going to see a lot of, especially with the launch of the taxonomy in Australia in the next few months. If we get really good methodologies for that, that can be a vehicle for a lot of electrification projects going forward.
Was that your one more thing?
That's not my one more thing.
Okay, so Frankie had
back
two.
onto mine.
You've had a sneaky sort of interstitial one more thing, and now you've got your actual one more thing.
Yes.
Is that what you're
So do you want me to do my one more thing more thing now?
Yes.
So
how much planning did you put
So I actually had 2 parts because my...
You don't get 3, mate, unless I get another one.
So my one more thing was...
This is like my kids. They say, he had 2, I need 2 as well.
My one more thing was going to be that, as many of you know, I became a parent recently. My wife and my baby Isabella made a guest appearance a couple of hours ago. Some of you may have seen her. So my one more thing was going to be that I am going on parental leave part-time for the rest of the year, soon starting in early July. And Monique Alfries from NABERS, who a lot of you may have worked with her before, she's going to be co-directing NABERS for the rest of 2024. Now, which is amazing. Those 2 things are still happening. But my new one more thing is that
This is getting ridiculous.
I was recently, all of us in this room work in this because we want to make a difference in climate change. And I recently was asked if I could take a short secondment for 4 months. I'm coming back. So just want to start with that.
I feel like I'm in the hall of mirrors here. Well, I'm not sure these are nested one more things now.
So if I could actually go on secondment for about 4 months, be the first director of the New South Wales Net Zero Commission, which is basically the state's equivalent of the Climate Change Authority in the Commonwealth. There are a bunch of really senior commissioners coming in. There's a big team that needs to be recruited, and there's the first report to Parliament due on the 1st of November, which needs to address, is New South Wales on track to reach their 2030 target, which the government just said, possibly not. So all of that needs to happen in the next 4 months. I was asked if I could lead that, create the team, onboard the commissioners, deliver the first report, and then come back to NABERS. So I'm actually going to go away for 4 months just when the consultation for CBD is going to be happening. I've been waiting for this moment for a decade. And
I detect a smidge of FOMO creeping in there.
No, and I just wanted to say that I'm not going very far and I'm not going for very long. We have major things happening in the building sector, and trusting all of you, neighbours, to all of you while I'm away. And also, I think that the opportunities we have at the table right now in the building sector are really important. And for me, going to the Commission was also an opportunity to raise that the building sector doesn't have targets to get to net zero emissions in any state or nationally. A lot of those metrics are not in place. Electrification of the existing building sector is at the ground floor or a very, very tall building we need to climb. And this is an opportunity to actually bring that to the fore as well.
You're going off to do a very important job for 4 months. Monique is still part-time. Who is supporting Monique?
Magali Wardle, who is here in the room, will be job sharing as Director of NABERS for the next 3 months. And then for the last 2 months, it will be Monique and James Elks, who is current Head of Product Development at NABERS.
Okay.
Superstar lineup. Can
Indeed.
we get a round of applause for that?
So, my one more thing, which will actually be one more thing, is...
Says with...
No. I'm going to bring this home. So, one thing that we haven't talked a lot about on our wrap-up is that we're also celebrating 25 years of NABERS.
Yeah.
We just referenced the incredible team that Carlos leads and is entrusting to Magali and Monique. Incredible crew working within New South Wales Government, partnering with some amazing public servants in Canberra and around the country on the CBD program. But then you've got, industry reps around the National Steering Committee. You've got NABERS assessors, facility managers, building owners. This is a really incredible community. But that goes back all the way back to the New South Wales Sustainable Development Authority that had that dream, that twinkle in the eye. People like Gavin Gilchrist and Alan Pearce and Paul Bannister said there's an opportunity here to actually create this operational benchmark for energy performance. And it was always about emissions. It was always about climate change. Way back 25 years ago, that is visionary. And the reason why we've got this opportunity to scale up now is because of work of people like that back then, but also that chain of humans that have carried the torch over those 25 years. So I just want us all to give them a round of applause. And I'm so excited to circle back to the start of the conversation to bring other people into that community. And I think you're both right. I think we're absolutely equal to the task of explaining the value proposition of NABERS, because there is such a good story to tell. And I'm sure that it's going to have just as much impact in all those other sectors as it has in the ones that have benefited from it to date. So that is our show and our conference for today. You can send in your comments, questions and reports to mailbag at Let Me Sum Up, and visit letmesumup.net for the full back catalogue of episodes and links to all the things we talked about today. But for Frankie Muscovich and Carlos Flores, I'm Luke Menzel. Thanks for 25 years of NABERS, and we will talk to you again soon.
Happy birthday.